how good is Minnesota? How much of that should be taken into the equation? And then we'll get into what you learned from these dual practices.
Sure. Minnesota's loaded. A lot of like where Minnesota's going is going to come down to the quarterback. I think that goes without saying, and what they wind up getting out of J.J. McCarthy. But like that roster and where they're at and what they've been able to build for Flores now on defense, because we already know how good their offense is. And then the primary problem with their offense last year is their offensive line. And they signed Will Fries and Ryan Kelly from the Colts and draft Donovan Jackson in the first round, or getting Christian Darrisaw back.
They got rid of Garrett Bradbury, which was addition by subtraction.
But they wanted to get bigger and stronger because they got pushed around by the Rams in the playoffs last year. And they got bigger and stronger at center. They got bigger and stronger at guard. I would, if J.J. McCarthy can be a top 10 quarterback, is
that fair to ask?
And it's a lot. No, I mean, it is. But they're going to set it up in a way. Like, look at the level of play Kevin O'Connell got out of Sam Darnold last year.
Yep.
Who's better physically, Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy?
Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that those guys, like, and I think we forget that sometimes, like, when you line these guys up, like, no, that guy was the third overall pick for a reason.
Everyone liked him.
And
I mean, everyone liked him when the Jets writers all thought he was good, and I think he's
going to be good in Seattle. I think that what's happened with the Jets is evident with Geno too, right? Like that. There's obviously been some things that have gone wrong there. But yeah, Minnesota's a really good team. Like Minnesota, if JJ can play like a top 10 quarterback, they could get to the Super Bowl. I think they're that good.
Okay. So, if you're dominated, and you've been, I'm sure to, dual practices, a ton of them. If you get dominated in those practices, how much of that is you're trying things that you wouldn't normally do in a game? How much is it that it's practice conditions? How seriously do you take teams' performances?
I think like it's the intent of the practice, and the coaches will work together on this stuff. So, and that's one of the reasons why they like using these more than preseason games, because you can rig the whole thing to see what you need to see. And so I'm going to put, like, there might be a practice where I'm trying to build guys up, and then there's other practices where I'm going to try to test guys and see how far I can push them. So, like, there's definitely different intents for, different practices, and when you're doing two of them the way the Vikings and Patriots did, there could be two different intents for the 2 different days for the coaches. The one thing that concerns me, and I wasn't there obviously, but the one thing that concerns me is the continually high sack number. And it's not just the offensive line. It's also Drake. And I just, again, like I think Vrabel is going to be able to get them to get their head above water to a 7-8 win level. I had a really interesting conversation with Sean Payton about this.
About the Patriots?
No, about quarterbacks and sack numbers.
Okay.
And he and I talked for a half hour about it. He was adamant. The sack is a quarterback stat. He's like, everybody wants to blame the line for it. He's like, the sack is a quarterback stat. You know who was never sacked? Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Tom Brady. And it was he was explaining to me how that number is how they got to Bo Nix. Like he looked at, and their top 2 quarterbacks in that year's draft. And he told me this last summer, right? And then we had this conversation again this summer. But last summer, he said to me, the best 2 quarterbacks in the draft were Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. And that was his assessment before they'd either of them had played a game. They did the 2
How would he know? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But he said one of the key stats, and they had all these different numbers, but he said one of the key stats is sacks. He said I had my analytics guy go back and look at the last 30 years of quarterbacks. He said to the analytics guy, find me a guy who was sacked a lot in college who then wasn't sacked a lot in the NFL. He said he couldn't find one.
Well, that's bad news for Shador.
Well, remember
really
Russell
for Shador.
But you remember Russell Wilson? He got sacked all the time in Seattle, and I think Carroll was like, that's not, and I think it pissed off the offensive line, right? Because he was drawing plays out and not getting rid of the ball.
Well, because it's the quarterback's job, and like,
we had a big on-air argument about that, by the way.
And Peyton's argument on this, and like he knows more about quarterbacking than almost anybody, was here's what the sack tests. The sack tests quarterback's movement, quarterback's instincts, quarterback's ability to process what's in front of him, ball out. And it was really interesting listening to it because it was like the great quarterbacks have the instincts and the processing ability to adjust to whoever's in front of them. And if you're taking a lot of sacks, the reality of that is a lot of people are going to put it on the line, but I think it's on the quarterback, and that's sacks are devastating because it's penalty, loss of down. It's worse than a penalty, like it's like almost like a personal foul.
But at the same time, there are certain things outside the quarterback's control. The Patriots' offensive line was far and away the worst in the league last year.
Okay.
Didn't give any quarterback a fighting chance. I think Sean Payton's theory is predicated upon at least a mediocre offensive line.
Okay, so here's the other thing. They had the same offensive line in 23 and 24. Russell Wilson, Bo Nix. They cut their sack number in half.
But Denver's offensive line was far better than what the Patriots had.
Okay.
So let's bring it back.
I'm not putting it on Drake.
Let's bring it back around to what you just saw with Drake Maye these last 2 weeks of joint practices. So he's taking a lot of sacks. I'm telling you, it's probably the majority is not his fault.
It's an alarming number, though. And that's my point. Is like the number is relative to your offensive line. Okay. There's no question about that. Like how good your offensive line is going to affect the sack number. But what Sean said to me really kind of got me thinking about this because it's like you would never see Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, even at a young age, have an alarmingly high sack number, right?
Correct.
Even if and we saw Peyton Manning play behind some brutal offensive lines. We saw Tom Brady. When they had injuries,
they lost 4 left tackles in 1 year,
right?
Yes.
But was the sack number ever?
No,
really
it
high?
wasn't. It wasn't.
Now he'd get the crap knocked out of him sometimes, and it would affect the way he would play, and sometimes he'd turn the ball over as a result. But I mean, if you look over the course of his career, and we could pull it up if you want, there was never a really high sack number. I just listening to Sean talk about this, it was like an awakening for me because I was like, you know what, it's right. I never thought about, but it's right. And so he did this. Then they did this separate study. The Broncos did, and they looked back at their 23 season. This is before they drafted Nix in 24, and they looked at they were not a good offense in 23, and they looked at their drive efficiency on drives where they didn't take a sack with Russell Wilson as the quarterback, and on drives where they didn't take a sack, they were actually slightly above average as an offense.
Okay.
And this was an offense that was the bottom of the league. So if they could just avoid taking a sack, that put them over the average. So it's just like an interesting thing to look at where, look, I don't think anybody's sitting here I'm not going to tell you that the Patriots are going to roll out a great offensive line this year. But Drake has to play within the context of what's in front of him. Okay? And it's not just Drake Maye in a vacuum playing quarterback the way he would play. No, you've got to play to the team that's around you. And so I think that's one thing that's going to be interesting this year is watching him and seeing, is he taking a lot of sacks? Because he has to have the awareness to know what's in front of him, have the internal clock to understand how much time he's going to have given what's in front of him, be able to process everything in front of him fast enough to get the ball out in time so he's not taking sacks.
Well, it's also on Josh McDaniels to call right plays to make sure that he has receivers open in a second and a half.
Yeah.
Because that seems like that's what he's going to be dealing with this year.
Yeah, so but I just think it's an interesting thing because I looked at that statistic, and this is right after. I mean, again, maybe I'm the prisoner of the conversation I just had with a really smart person, but it kind of, when I look at that number now, I'm kind of looking at that number.
Chris, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, what's going on? It's funny when you were bringing up for sack statistics. Had me thinking too pre-draft. Jaden Daniels and Drake Maye are borderline identical at 6.04, 6.05.
Okay.
And Caleb Williams is the worst, almost 8%. So that take on Drake Maye taking too many sacks with a patchwork offense at North Carolina, no real skill players. Drake, I think, ranked 3 or 4, so he was right there at the top.
Okay. I'm just saying it's something I have my radar up for now, in general. And Caleb was the one that was alarming for the Broncos when they were looking at it.
Yeah, so, and regardless of what the actual numbers are, the fact remains that Sean Payton before the draft told you that he had Jaden Daniels, or before the season, had Jaden Daniels as Bo Nix as his top 2 quarterbacks, and the reasoning for it. So whatever he saw in film, I mean, that was the reason he gave you. And then we saw what happened is they were the 2 best quarterbacks last year, even though Caleb Williams wasn't bad. And if you look at some of the losses that Chicago had, like they should have beat Washington when they played them.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
That was ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, that was that
Tyree
Hail Mary.
Stevenson.
Yeah, where the defender for Chicago was yelling in the crowd and like had his back to the effing play.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that happens. Yeah. All you got to talk about having too much your phone in your hand. Like he had the ADD. He couldn't focus. It was one play,
and you're off over here.
Yeah, just you have to focus for 5 seconds. Like you just, I think I could be in that position. I could see myself losing it.
Real quick about Caleb Williams. He had a decent year last year. The Bears fell short of expectations, but his offensive line is much better this year. Are the expectations for him as high as they should be?
I think the expectations internally are just for development there.
That division is impossible.
I think I told you guys he looked pretty terrible the day I was there. And I talked to Ben Johnson about it, and his explanation was we're feeding him through a fire hose right now. And the way they're doing it there is just give him everything right off the bat, and then over the course of camp we'll narrow it down. We'll see what he can handle. We'll see what he can't handle, and then we'll streamline it to the point where we have an offense when we get to week 1. Which like in that market where everything Bears is so scrutinized, is gonna bring the heat on the outside. Now Ben made this point to me too. Is like when we were doing this with Jared Goff, it didn't look that way because he's a veteran quarterback, but he had bad days. They just weren't magnified this way because he wasn't Caleb Williams in Chicago, and so I think I'm fascinated to see what it looks like around Caleb Williams and what he looks like in Ben Johnson's offense. And, again, Ben Johnson came up under Adam Gase, and we've talked about how Adam Gase, one of the big problems with Sam Darnold early in his career was Gase was trying to play him like he was Peyton Manning, and Sam Darnold just isn't that guy. And so now it's a test of Ben Johnson, who had a veteran quarterback in Jared Goff in Detroit and was able to do a lot. Can you be as good if you're forced to scale it back a little bit because you've got a younger quarterback who isn't quite ready to handle all of it?
And Adam Gase, his whole strategy for that team was, I'm going to lock myself in a room with Sam Darnold and everyone else can take care of everything else. Like, apparently Adam Gase was not exactly present. He was hyper-focused on Darnold. And
well, I think it was a great example, though, of, like, what happens when these guys, when it's, like, your offense kind of winds up superseding like what's best for the player and what's best for the quarterback, and it's like, no, this is my system. Well, it's not going to do you any good if the quarterback's not ready to run that system. And I think Adam would tell you this now, that like Sam came out, like Sam was very raw coming out of USC. He was just sort of a big athlete playing quarterback, and had to be developed, and it was going to take time. And Gase had like record-breaking success with Peyton Manning, and then he gets to Chicago with Jay Cutler, and Cutler's a very smart quarterback for all of his problems. Then goes to Miami, and Ryan Tannehill's a few years into the league, and then he's got a rookie in Sam Darnold, or a second-year guy in Sam Darnold with the Jets, who again is just this big raw athlete, and you're trying to run your quote-unquote your offense, and the guy's just not ready to do it.
Yeah,
and so Sam needed to be. That was one of the things when Sam got to Carolina, and then especially when Kyle got a hold of him in San Francisco, was like, no, we're going to slow you way down. We're going to scale way back, and we're just going to kind of try to get you playing fast again. And, now you see the result. He looks like a different player than he did a couple years ago.
For the latest from the Sports Hub, download at 985thesportshub.com.